So, hi everyone. Hers this side. I'm your host for today's session, and it's great to have you all here as part of this learning community. And we have someone truly special with us, Whitney Garner, who brings in 20 years of experience in the test prep world. So, Whitney is a former instructor and a curriculum head at Manhattan, and even founder of Engage Prep, where she continues to mentor and prepare students with deep personalized coaching. And today she's going to help us with challenging critical reasoning questions. Yeah, something I struggled with when I started my prep, and I'm happy to hear a few great insights on how to crack this tough nut. So looking forward to it. And yeah, we have plenty of room for Q&A today, so please keep your questions coming in the chat, and let's make this an interactive and high energy session. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Whitney.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Harsh. Welcome. I appreciate the really lovely and warm welcome. I have been in this industry for a long time. I mean, I started when I was 4, because clearly I'm only in my 20s, right? Like, let's not age ourselves,
Yeah,
shall we?
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But hello, it is a pleasure to get to be with all of you. I'm actually really, really excited about today's lesson, primarily because of how frustrating critical reasoning is for so many people. And I'm just going to say this right up front: most people do critical reasoning wrong. Like, wrong, 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 all the way wrong. And that's okay. We're going to fix it today, or at least we're going to fix the way we think about critical reasoning with some practice today. So I want you to imagine studying for the quant section of the GMAT for a moment, right? So when you go in to study for the quant section of the test, you're not going to look at it as all 21 questions are the same question, right? Like, you're not going to think like, oh, I'm going to do every single question the exact same way. Every single math problem has the exact same solution. Like, you'd never do that, right? You would treat like a quadratics problem wildly differently from a word problem, or even more differently from like a probability and combinatorics. So in some parts of the test, we're aware that just because the question has 5 answer choices and some information at the top doesn't mean that they're the same question. In other places, like the verbal section, we make the mistake of treating all critical reasoning as if it's the same. And that is the number one mistake that people make, is thinking that critical reasoning is one question type, when in fact it's not. It's at minimum like 5 different question types. But as soon as you can start to recognize those 5 different question types, even the hardest of the hard questions become easier to unravel, because we can find the pattern, right? So it's sort of like if you've learned exponent rules, right? Like, an easy question, great, is fine. But even as questions get harder and harder, if you feel confident with your exponent rules, they become easier and easier to solve, right? It gets harder for the test to make them hard. Well, we're going to see the exact same thing with critical reasoning, that as we understand the archetypes and patterns within critical reasoning, and there aren't that many, but as we start to understand them, understanding where the right answer is going to fit and therefore picking it becomes wildly easier. So let me share my screen. We'll get us started. I've got a little exercise for us to begin. I figured it'd be nice to kind of warm up with something, right? An activity. So just to let you know, right, as Harsh mentioned, I'm here with Engage Prep, my like baby of a company that I love so much. I love all of my colleagues still at Manhattan Prep and all my years there, and throughout the test prep industry. But I just wanted something a little bit different. I wanted to think about how we teach things a little bit differently. And so we're doing that over at Engage Prep, and I'm really excited. So hopefully after today, you'll come and find me over there. We do free consultations, so come hang out. But today's goal is for you to understand this idea of an argument archetype. And we're going to really focus in on the primary question that's tested. So I'm not sure if my screen is sharing on y'all side. I can see it maybe, but maybe Harsh, you have to kind of like load it up.
Yeah, we
Beautiful.
can.
Thank you. Amazing. So here we are, our advanced critical reasoning. We're going to break down some argument archetypes, but like, we've talked way too long already. It's been like 7 minutes. So it's time for you to try something. It's time for you to do a problem. So let's do it. I'm going to put a critical reasoning problem on the board. There's an argument at the top, a question in the middle, and then 5 answer choices. I'll also give you a timer kind of set on my side. We'll say about 2 minutes just to try this on your own. Feel free to type your thoughts about an answer in the chat window, or you're welcome to kind of wait. So let's give it a go. All right, so we're sitting here just around the 2-minute mark. And I'd like to kind of get a sense of like how that felt for time. Maybe type in the chat window. I'm getting some different answers coming in. So far, I've gotten almost every answer represented. That's my favorite kind of question. I'm missing some A's, so if anyone out there really loves answer choice A, right, feel free to make a plug for those. But how did this feel? And in fact, how did this feel in 2 minutes? I have some opinions about how critical reasoning feels in 2 minutes, but I think it feels stressful. It feels tight. Still no consensus.
Yeah, someone who wants to just close the window and run away.
Yeah, actually, heard. Right? The screen pops up and it's just like, could there be more text on the screen all at one time? Right? This is very hard. Yeah, no, and I guess I picked it because it is hard to understand. Actually, Harsh did a great job helping pick this because it is hard to understand. This is a question that's like, oh my gosh. And the thing is I have to do a lot for critical reasoning. So I need to figure out like what's happening in the upfront argument. So if we, just to get a little bit of terminology, this piece at the top is an argument. And then this bit in the middle is usually where it's going to be, is the question. So think of that as like, what's the specific question that's being asked of us? And then we've got 5 answer choices. That's like the format of critical reasoning. So not only do I have to read an argument and understand kind of like dense text, it's usually only 3, maybe 4 sentences long, but very dense text. I then have to figure out what specific thing they want me to do with that text. And then I have to move through 5 answer choices that are also rarely short. The answer choices themselves are also quite dense. So there's a lot of reading to do in 2 minutes, much less the understanding piece behind it. So we need a way to start to think about critical reasoning as kind of an organizing down into different techniques. And so the first thing we want to start to do is take eyes to this middle piece. And so we're not going to spend a ton of time looking at all of the possible questions that you can see here, but I wanted to show you a variety of them. This is going to be the key first few seconds of any critical reasoning question, because this is going to be the moment where I decide, oh, this is quadratics. Nope, just kidding. This is a percent story problem. Wait, no. This is, probability or combinatorics. It's in those first 5 to 10 seconds that I'm going to assess which kind of initial path of critical reasoning I'm going to take. So just to show you kind of a variety of these like questions that you might be asked, take a look at what's on the screen. You might give them a scan. All of these represent a different ask of the test, right? A different task that you're going to have to complete. Oh no. Phoebe said, I tried to come up with an answer in my own words and it didn't match any of them. Ruh-roh. Uh-oh. And so you might notice as you're scanning over some of these questions, things like, okay, I might have to explain why something didn't work. Or I might have to actually like understand how some boldface pieces, like are they conclusions, right? I got to look for assumptions, or I might have to strengthen an argument. I might have to draw my own conclusion, or I might even need to evaluate an argument. Now, even now, you might still be looking at it like, sure, Whitney, but how does this fundamentally change the process? Like, I still have to read the argument. I still have to deconstruct it, digest it, understand what's happening, and then I'm going to answer the question. And the thing is that if we go down that path, if we think that each one of these questions is equally tied to the same sort of argument, we've already made the mistake, right? We've already lost valuable time. So what I want to kind of present to you is the big framework of critical reasoning. And then we're going to dial in on one very specific question for a little bit of practice so you can see how this like understanding what archetype I'm in works. And I've chosen the one that is most highly represented. And so here are our kind of categories of critical reasoning. I wanted you to leave today with kind of a big picture. I make the argument that there are basically 5 kind of groups or categories of argument types. And so what I mean by an argument type is like the assumption family. There might be multiple questions, like they might ask you to strengthen, they might ask you to weaken, they might ask you to evaluate, or to even find an assumption. But all 4 of these questions actually turn out to be the same question being asked of the same type of argument. So anytime I see one of these four, I'm going to proceed down the exact same path in terms of how I assess critical reasoning. But that path is going to be very, very different from the path that I would follow if I thought I was supposed to be explaining a discrepancy, or the path if I was dealing with a boldface, or the path for an inference, or the path for logic and structure. Right? So the first thing I have to do is a quick assessment of which of these 5 paths I'm going down. Now, good news, bad news, is that one of these paths dominates the others. That's good news because that means if we really put our effort into studying the one path kind of really in depth, it's going to cover us for most of the critical reasoning that we'll see, right? But it does still mean that we need to at least review on easier levels some of the other question types. So I've put them in order of how often they show up. I want to take a poll from y'all. What percentage of GMAT questions do you think fall into this like assumption umbrella? So they ask you to strengthen or weaken, evaluate, or come up with your own assumption. So out of the 100% of questions that exist out in the ether, what percentage of them do you think are this assumption family? It's a very good guess. Yeah, more than 50 is a very good guess. It's a very, very good guess. It's a whole lot more than 50. A whole lot more than 50. Yeah, so the fact is the vast, and I mean vast majority, 70% of the questions that you'll see are going to fall in this category. And 48 of those 70%, so 48% of the total questions, almost half of all the questions you see will be strengthened and weakened. So that's not 48% of 70%, that's 48% of the total. So half of the questions you're likely to see will be strengthen and weaken. That means if we can get really good at strengthen and weaken, we can handle the vast majority of questions that we'll see on the test. We'll want to like sprinkle in other types, but this assumption family archetype is where we really want to make sure that we are winning points. And here's the one place where people just aren't doing that effectively. I think that once people start to learn discrepancy and boldface and inference, their ability to manage the question increases. But I do think that most of us still think we understand arguments. Like, I get what it means to strengthen. I get what it means, right? And we don't. We actually don't. So I wanted to give you some kind of insight into what I think about when I see assumptions. So the first thing I think about is if I see one of these 4 question types, I know exactly what the argument I'm about to look at looks like. There's going to be an argument that has a conclusion, a very clear one, and there will be logical gaps or logical leaps involved. They may not be obvious, but they will be there. And that argument will fit into one of 3 major archetypes. Super simple. It's just 3 of them. Now, on top of those archetypes, there are some subtle layers that the test writers can throw in to like add tools, but primarily speaking, all of our assumption family arguments will be one of 3 archetypes. We'll see these as a prediction, a plan, or an explanation. They'll all fit into one of those. And then our job is to map it to one of those archetypes, and that'll point us directly towards the whole. It'll point us directly to the right answer. So if I know I'm in this question, I have to find my conclusion. I have to map it through my archetype, find my holes, I'm out. Right. I should, hopefully, Phoebe, be able to predict an answer that actually shows up down in my answer choices this time. So the other ones show up way less frequently. The kind of next in line is discrepancy, just to kind of finish it out. About 15% of questions are discrepancy. The issue that most people have is that they aren't very good at identifying the surprise. But once you start to learn to identify the surprise, prediction, plan, and explanation. I've got a slide coming if you're not. Then followed pretty closely by bold-faced, right around 10%. Inference is even fewer, about 6% of questions are going to be that draw your own conclusion. And then those logic and structures like logical flaw, the person responds to this person by doing whatever, are very, very few and far between. We're looking at, only a couple actually exist out in released material. So just keep in mind that if we can really nail, again, this assumption family, we will. But I want to highlight for a second, so I'm going to leave you with the slide before we kind of move into the exercise, that each of these, the argument that's sitting above that question is going to feel very different, right? So my assumption family will have a conclusion, but it should be pretty straightforward. It will have some logical gaps or leaps that may not be obvious. Boldface, however, which also has a conclusion, is going to be extraordinarily complicated. There'll be multiple part arguments with nested conclusions, but that's because I'm not being asked to evaluate it, I'm just being asked to track it. Whereas something like a discrepancy, there's rarely a conclusion. It's just that we've got two different things that seem to be in opposition, two facts that seem to conflict. So we're not looking for a conclusion. We're not trying to evaluate the quality of research. We're literally just trying to identify what things don't agree with each other. Versus an inference, that's just going to be a lineup of details that we are going to draw from. Logic and structure, they occur so frequently that honestly I leave these for most people to never, honestly. But these will have some sort of kind of flawed logic or reasoning. They're going to look a little bit more like an assumption family kind of argument with a conclusion. But these also might be the ones where you see two people talking and one is like responding to the other, if you've encountered one of those. So I wanted this on the board so you can kind of see the big picture, but we are going to focus in for the last 10 or 15 minutes of our chat so that we have plenty of time for Q&A on this assumption family strategy directly. Yeah, okay. So I make the argument that we have three types of archetypes in the world of assumption: predictions, plans, and explanations. And these three things are subtly different, but they are different. And the way you exploit these types of arguments in order to kind of point at where they're flawed, where the holes live, is different. And so a visual mapping is exceedingly powerful. So I know a lot of people don't use their paper for the verbal section. This is a place where I'm going to encourage you to change that behavior, to start mapping and visualizing arguments. So 3 different arguments. I'm going to put them all on the board one at a time, kind of simplistic arguments. I don't want you to think too critically about it. I just want you to read it and imagine like, okay, Whitney's calling this a prediction. Huh, okay, interesting. So let's take about 30 seconds or so with each one just to kind of read it and get a picture. All right. No hurry, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of reveal a plan. So you can see the subtle shifts in what a plan might look like. Okay, and last but not least, I think this is the one that is the hardest for people to spot, mostly because people don't realize it exists or aren't kind of thinking in this framework. An explanation. So I want to give you a moment to kind of consider all 3 of these. This idea of a prediction, a plan, and an explanation. Again, on the surface, they all just feel like somebody making a claim, right? Somebody says, here's some stuff that I know or believe is true. Here's what I think is true based on those facts, right? Seems simple enough. However, the way these are organized is different enough that it matters. So one thing to think about with a prediction and a plan is predictions and plans have a tendency of being kind of forward-looking in the sense that I see what's happening today. So prediction, I see what's happening right now, and I'm going to make a prediction about what else is also happening or will soon happen. I'm not kind of doing it on purpose. I don't have an intention there. I'm just sort of seeing what the world looks like and assessing what's coming next. That's different from a plan. So a prediction is often based on understood relationships that exist in the world. So this first one, like chip tech, we're talking about supply and pricing. A known relationship that when supply falls, prices tend to go up, right? Because there's limited supply. And so predictions tend to have this, you might be familiar with, like ceteris paribus feeling to them. So ceteris paribus essentially just means all else equal. It says that if nothing else were to change, then yeah, a drop in 40% of the world's smartphone processors would absolutely cause an increase in price. So we would expect that in this case, X, halting production, would cause Y, this increase in prices. What we want to think about for a prediction is what else might be happening out there. And we're going to map this in a second. This is different from a plan. A plan is often a guess at, if I do this, will this thing happen? There isn't a guarantee that X will cause Y or that then Y will cause Z. It's sort of a, well, will it? Will this work? Let me see. And so instead of a prediction, we're not wondering in a prediction, would X cause Y? We're wondering in a prediction, what else is happening? In a plan, we're literally wondering, is X even going to cause Y? Will that even work the way you say it's going to work? Will that have the intended effect? So they're both making kind of forward guesses about what's happening, but using slightly different information. So that means that the assumptions and holes are going to be located in different places. Explanation is the tricky one, because most of us, if you've kind of studied with most of the major test prep creators, most of us map arguments with like an X, therefore Y, right? The arrow that moves you forward into space, right? Like X moves me forward into Y. Explanations are backwards looking. And so these don't map the way that most of us have been taught to map, which is why these are so much more complicated. The way an explanation works is that I look and say, hey, here's what's happening in the world right now. Who can I blame? What can I credit or explain this with? I'm looking back in time to see what might be the cause of this. So it doesn't move in the same direction as predictions and plans. And so if we don't map that properly mentally and physically on our paper, we're probably going to make some mistakes. So let me show you what I mean by mapping. We'll do this really quickly. But generally, for me, a prediction in its most generic form takes the form of, there's some X's happening out here in the world. They may give me 1, 2, 3. And my conclusion is that Y is going to happen. So I see X, and then I guess, right? I conclude that Y is coming. So in this place, we've got a much more kind of simplistic argument, right? So our actual example here, we see this fire and halted production. So we see a reduction in production of chips, which we then think is going to cause a rise in price, right? Simple. I don't need to go crazy. I don't need to draw a bunch of fancy stuff. I just want to see I see this, I conclude this. So I said that predictions have a ceteris paribus piece to them, meaning like what's in the way, what's the problem, right? What other things might be happening. And so for this type of thing, when I'm looking for the holes or the flaws, what I'm looking for, right, are there any other Z's, for example, out here that are changing that might also impact this? So what do y'all think? Let's put ourselves in the real world on this one. Let's come up with a couple of examples. Sure, Chip Check supplies 40% of the world's smartphone processors, and they're going to have to halt production for 6 months. Could something else be changing that would impact this conclusion? Like, what else could be happening out on the world market that could impact world pricing? Because that's where the holes or the flaws in this argument are going to come from. Yeah, okay, we could have some tariff type things happening. Tariffs will certainly increase prices, but tariffs might also push some behavior to change. And that's probably what we're going to be looking for here is other behavioral changes. What if at the same time that this is happening, some other company steps in and has just ramped up production, right? What if there's another company sitting out there? Exactly, right? Now all of a sudden the rest of these companies have increased their production. Yep. So if nothing else changes, sure, this drop in supply is going to increase the price, but other things might change. What if we've also got a stockpile sitting out there that we didn't know about? right? So, okay, fine. They're going to like reduce supply, but what if we're sitting on this massive stockpile? And they're sitting on a massive stockpile. So they have more than 6 months worth of chips, smartphone processing chips to be able to sell us. Maybe we don't actually see a reduction in the supply of materials. So if I'm in a prediction, I know that any answer to a strengthen, weaken, assumption, or evaluate is going to be looking at what else impacts price on the global market. That's where it's coming from. And so I'm going to look for something that would strengthen this conclusion by saying there isn't a stockpile out there, no other companies can help us, we really are in trouble. If I wanted to weaken this argument, I'd want to say that these things were out there. These stockpiles do exist. These other companies are ramping up production, right? Or maybe demand is going down. So I would want to try and, this would be the specific lever that I'm looking for. Exactly. What if Chip Tech has a number of other factories? This is just one of 57 of their factories. It's like, oh, well, okay, we don't really care. It's a drop in the bucket. Exactly. These are great ideas. So let's look at how this, like looking for other things that impact the conclusion, is different from a plan, right? So we've got our downtown merchant plan. A plan has the generic form of X is going to cause Y, we hope, which would cause Z. Usually plans have a multi-step kind of piece. There's usually like an intermediary piece. And so I'm going to do X to get, I could probably spell better, but here we go, to get Z, right? So I'm going to enact some change. I'm going to charge more. I'm going to institute a fee. I'm going to offer tax incentives. I'm going to give people a price break. I'm going to write tickets, whatever. I'm going to do this thing. It's probably going to change some sort of behavior so that it gets me the outcome that I want. The thing is that in this world, I'm not so sure that these dominoes, if you will, are going to fall. Those are a guess. Notice in a prediction, I wasn't guessing if this arrow held. It will. I know that arrow holds. What I'm guessing is there other stuff out there? Right? So I don't care. There's not going to be an answer that talks about, like, does production actually impact, like, the price? No, that's not going to exist. That will be an issue here. It'll be like, well, X might not actually cause Y the way you think it will. Or Y might not actually cause Z the way you think it will. So, for example, here we want to give free parking. So we want to let people park for free. What do we think that's going to do? That's going to give us more shoppers. And so that's going to increase revenue. Well, what I want to ask now is, well, will it? Will free parking actually bring more shoppers downtown? Is it possible that that arrow fails? How might that arrow fail? That free parking doesn't attract more shoppers who spend time browsing. What else could that free parking incentivize? Yeah, they could park and go somewhere else. It could be that residents just fill it up. Yeah, Harsh, what's another one?
Maybe visit restaurants. Or maybe the quality of the product is not that good. So maybe they might not even care visiting.
Yeah, free parking may not be the issue at all. You're exactly right? So it could be that free parking incentivizes the wrong people, right, to park. It incentivizes residents to sit down there. It incentivizes people to go to work or to restaurants, not shopping. But Harsh makes a phenomenal point. What if downtown stinks? Like, there's nothing there. And so, like, it's not the lack of parking that has stopped people from coming downtown. The issue isn't free parking. Free parking won't get you shoppers because the problem is bad stores. There aren't stores. There aren't available places. There's no stores people want to shop at. Okay, so maybe this domino falls. But what if it does? What if it works? What if the free parking does get people to come downtown to shop and to browse? Is that going to necessarily increase merchant revenue just because we have more people coming downtown? No, maybe not, right? We might actually get so many people coming downtown that now we have crowds and lines, and it's starting to upset people who want to, like, shop and browse and look around, and they don't want to go buying anymore. They'd rather not deal with it's like, it's not worth it. There's too many people now. I hate that. I don't want to go. And so what we're looking for in a plan is not what other outside actors impact revenue. What we're looking for is, how do I break these arrows? How would these dominoes, like, not fall? Like, if I thump one, will they all fall as expected to make this beautiful chain of events? Right? So if I know I'm in a plan, that's what I look for. I map it, and my eyes are on the arrows. So every time I go through answer choices, I'm evaluating, does this answer choice impact an arrow? If so, how? Is it making the arrow stronger or weaker? That's all we ever need. Finally is the explanation. Yeah? And so this is the complicated one, which is also the problem we had at the beginning. So it shouldn't be a surprise that explanations are complicated. So what does an explanation mean? Well, I graph explanations a little bit differently. I graph them still the same way. I say that I see why, and therefore, right, I'm going to do a dotted line. I'm going to guess X. Right, so I can still see the visual cause and effect relationship, but I want to make it really clear that I'm not sold that this is the actual one. Now, here's the thing. Rarely is the answer going to be that no, X doesn't cause Y. Right, like rarely is that going to be the case. What we're actually looking for is, are we sure it's X and not something else? That's always the answer in an explanation. Are we sure? Like, you're blaming X, you're crediting X, but like, is there anything else out there that could have done this? Because if there's anything else out there that could have done this, you don't get to give X the credit. Right? So if I want to strengthen this argument, if I want to strengthen this arrow, I need to knock out any Z's that are out here. If I want to weaken this arrow, I need to support any Z's that are sitting out there. So let's look at this in the kind of framework of this argument. What do we know is happening? TechStart cannot recruit senior engineers, while Tech Giant, no problem, right? So we've got that Tech Giant is way out recruiting TechStart, right? So this is in recruits. And so what are we blaming? We're blaming prestige, brand, right? So I'm guessing this guy, right? Because I see this. What else? Right? If we start to look at it in this framework, it starts to be easier to see the whole, right? Like, is there anything else in the world that could help Tech Giant attract top talent that isn't brand reputation? No, that's a great one. Any other one?
Employee benefits, maybe?
Benefits. What if they just don't pay very well, right? Like, they pay terribly. They tell you in an interview that we're a family around here, which means you're going to be working like 900 hours a week, right? Like, there are a million reasons. It's in a terrible location. Tech Giant lets you work remotely. TechStart makes you come into the middle of Manila, right? Like, I don't know. Like, there's like job stability. Maybe TechStart, there's like information we're learning that TechStart is having trouble. They're not as financially viable. Their products are terrible. There's not very many people that work. I mean, there's a million Z's out here, right? There are a million things that could impact why Tech Giant is able to do so well and TechStart can't. And so the idea that we're going to just like very clearly choose brand reputation, they're hoping that we're reading the argument to understand, not to attack. And so we visualize the argument to attack. Explanations are the easiest thing to get a reader to just follow along with. And so we want to be really, really careful. Yeah? Okay, so we've seen the three types. It is now time to assess the one that we did before, right? So let's take a look. I've kind of alluded to it. This is our press secretary. So what do we think? Give it a read again and see how it fits. So what do you think? Prediction, plan, or explanation? Yeah, right? It might be a little bit easier to see this as an explanation now. Right? What do we see? What's the thing that we see? Right? So don't forget that your plan will always be that let me get a different color here, let me get black, okay. That we will see something and therefore blame or credit something else. And again, I want you to notice that the notes I take are not extensive, right? Like this is not me writing down sentences of information. I'm just jotting this down so I get a clear visual of what's happening. So what are we seeing? What is the fact that is true in the world? Yeah, the canceled projects. Beautiful. They offer as evidence the fact that 90% of the projects canceled were in such districts. And so I got to go look to see what that was. This is districts controlled by opposition parties. So what do we see? And we see, I'm going to type this because my handwriting will be too slow. So we see that the president is canceling, 90% projects in opposition districts. Okay, got it. So this will be fine. This is our evidence. And what are they blaming? Let's ignore everything else for now. There's more stuff here, but what are they blaming? They're offering as evidence. So we've got this original critics claim that the president's recent highway project cancellations demonstrate that he's vindictive, or they're vindictive, right? And so that's the opponent. The opponent is blaming, right? Our critics are blaming this vindictive desire. What's our argument trying to blame? Our argument, our author is trying to blame or credit what? So here's where we got to be really careful. Yeah, budgetary policy, good budgetary policy, right? So the credit, the explanation that our author is trying to step with is so the president's choice was clearly motivated by sound budgetary policy. So the person who wrote this argument is saying our president, sound budgetary, right? Sound budget. Sound budget policies are what caused the president to cancel 90% of projects in opposition districts. And we should encounter one other piece here. We already have a possible other explanation, right? The other explanation that might be possible here is partisan, right? This president is a partisan hack. They're punishing, right? And so I'm going to put down here partisan. And our author is claiming that no, this isn't the case. Right? Our author is claiming no, I can credit sound budget policies because it's not partisan politics. And so my job for this argument is to find an assumption. Right? So what is an assumption? An assumption is something that has to be true in order for this argument to stand. Okay, so an assumption says what must be true in order for this piece to live. So we think about that for a second. In order for this to live, I have to show that sound budget policy was the cause, or I need to show that partisan policies were not the cause, or I need to show that there isn't some other not budget policy that's the cause. Right? So I've got my picture of my, okay, what is it supposed to be? What causes what? I am trying to find an assumption, which in many ways is like a deep, deep strengthen. I want to make it possible that these budget policies are the reason for this. And so I want to double down on the fact that it's not partisan, or double down on the fact that it's not some external third party, what have you. Yeah. So, oops, there we go. I don't know if you can still see my screen. Yeah, you could. I can't. It's like it disappeared for a minute. So now let's take a look at our answer choices, right? So first thing we want to do, get out this, here we go. First thing we want to do is eliminate anything that would weaken. So again, remember, I want to be able to credit sound budget with cancels. That's why this president was doing all the canceling. So let's start with A. What if there are other ways for the president to punish districts other than this, like, canceling projects? Because I want to think again about what I'm trying to focus on. I want to show that it was not partisan. I'm looking for an answer that makes it clear that this is not partisan, or that this is more firmly, like, clearly because of a good budget. Knowing that the president does or doesn't have other ways of punishing doesn't really tell me if this was punishment or not, right? So I don't know. Just because there are other ways doesn't mean that the president did or didn't use this method as a method of punishment. So this hasn't knocked out this political kind of hackery, if you will, right? Because remember, what I'm trying to knock out is this political part, that it's because of politics. All right, so what about B? The scheduled projects identified as wasteful in the report, this is weird language, were not mostly projects in districts controlled by the president's party. One of the things that they'll do to make things complicated is they'll change the language by making it negated. So what I'll do is I'll switch the negation just to see if it matters. Just to see if it matters, right? And we can do that with the first one. Like, would it matter if canceling highway projects was the only way? No, I don't think that would matter. Would it matter if the scheduled highway projects identified as wasteful? So would it matter if all the wasteful projects were actually in the president party's districts? What do y'all think?
Yep. I would
yes, feels like it would matter.
Politics involved. Yep.
Well, because what would that mean? If all of the highway projects that were wasteful were in the president's, were in the president's districts, but the president was canceling everything in not his districts, the president wouldn't be moving along with the scheduled highway projects, like with what was identified as wasteful. So it seems like if I at least change this not, it matters. So I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to move to the next one. So I'm going to use my process of elimination. Let's move to C. Right? Exactly. It's a very good point. If I got rid of this not, this would weaken the argument. Hang on to that if you can remember that piece. All right, C. The number of projects canceled was a big proportion of all the highway projects that were to be undertaken by the government. I mean, we kind of know it was a big proportion. Does knowing whether it was a significant proportion or not explain to me whether I'm blaming budget or blaming partisan politics? No, right? I need something that really is helping me understand, does this affect the president through politics, or is this the president actually using sound, budgetary advice? D, the highway projects canceled in districts controlled by the party were not generally, okay, so let's, again, we'll knock out this not, just for a second, see what happens. So this not, when we knotted it, it weakened the argument. The highway projects canceled in the districts controlled by the president were more expensive than the projects canceled in districts controlled by the opposition. Ooh, what would that mean? If the president is canceling the expensive projects in their own district and the cheap projects in an opposition party, that actually might strengthen my argument. Yeah, because like the president's willing to cut money in their own districts in ways. So if anything, this one, if I break it, strengthens. And then we'll look at E. So we'll hang on to it because it matters. It clearly matters. And then E, reports by nonpartisan auditor are, so let's get rid of this not again. Reports by nonpartisan auditors are generally regarded as a source of objective assessments of government projects. So this would mean that opposition parties trust nonpartisan auditors. Would that be good for the argument or bad for the argument? That might be good for my argument. Because if those nonpartisan auditors weren't trustworthy, then like anything they're calling a sound budget, I can't trust. And so if reports by a nonpartisan auditor are seen as trustworthy by everybody involved, that's probably a good thing. So if anything, if I break this one, it strengthens. So I've gotten rid of A and C because they don't impact, and I'm left with B, D, and E because they seem to matter. They seem to matter. So now here's the crucial part of an assumption. Okay? Whatever happens when you break an answer choice, and this isn't just true for assumption, this is true for strength and weaken. If I break the answer choice, it's doing now the opposite of what it was originally. Right? So if when I broke B, it weakened, that means originally it must have been strengthened. When I broke D, it strengthened, that means originally it was weakened. So your trick in a lot of these cases when you're trying to figure out if something matters is you break the answer choice to see if it matters. And then what you've identified, what you've uncovered carefully is the opposite. And so I make a note to myself that says the opposite of weaken. This is the opposite of strengthen. The opposite of this answer choice strengthens, right? So opposite of weaken, opposite of strengthen, opposite of strengthen. I'm going to go back up to my question. The question says, which of the following is an assumption? That's a support, right? An assumption makes an argument possible. So I need an answer choice that would originally strengthen. So I need one that its opposite weakened. And so my correct answer is B. The hope is that my map can help me eliminate things that don't matter. And then my map can help me understand how the kind of edited versions of the answer choices impact the argument. The final step for these extra complex ones is, do I have to use this added trick of the like not, right, or but? And so what this would mean is that answer choices D and E in their original wording are actually weakened. Right? Because the opposite thing, right, when I opposited the answer choice, it strengthened. That means its original version was a weaken. And there wouldn't be. That's such a great question. That is a phenomenal question. There will not be. What if we have two options which are opposite weakening? Well, we can't have two options that both work. I know that things will say which of the following best supports or which of the following best weakens. That's never true. The answer is always going to be one definitively strengthens or definitively weakens. You're not going to have to choose from an array of questions that strengthen or weaken. So our goal is once again to try and first assess, right? So just to kind of put us back there, is to first assess which of my argument types I'm in, which family am I in. Then, since most of the time you're going to be in the assumption family, your biggest goal here is to identify that archetype. We've got our three main archetypes here, so let's map them out again together. I've lost my little page. Here we go. So we've got predictions, where predictions generally take the form of we see X's out in the world and assume that they might cause a Y. A plan is that we enact an X, so we do X. That might cause Y, but inevitably what we want is Z. Versus an explanation where we see Y and we want to blame or credit X. If we're starting to look for the holes or assumptions or flaws in a prediction, we're looking for what else out here impacts Y. In a plan, we're asking, will these actually hold as expected? In an explanation, I'm wondering, is there something else out here that I could blame or credit that's not X? Okay, I know I have pushed us insanely long. So if you have questions, we have like 2 minutes. Like this happens every single time. I want to give you everything. I want to teach you everything. I want to tell you everything every time. But we have like 2 minutes. So hit me with it. If you've got any big questions in the chat window, hit me with it. I'm also going to throw an email up for you if you'd like to contact me We do free one-on-one sessions, so feel free to grab me for any of those. But talk to me if you've got any other questions. Let me grab them.
So I can ask you the first question.
Yeah, of course, please.
While I was preparing, at least on the hard level side of questions, I often used to get stuck with two options at the end. Do you feel that's kind of common if we still follow the strategy which you suggested today? And if so, what would be your advice or suggestion to do in those scenarios?
So I actually don't think it's as common. And here's why, just as like a quick visual, and I'll put that back up. One of the ways that test writers make a question hard is they, like, let's imagine the 5 answer choices, and we've got this concept of like the answer choice seems right versus seems wrong. One way to make this hard is to say, like, let's say this is the actual right answer. I make this really easy by making all the wrong answers seem really wrong. Right? Like, that's how I make a question easy. I don't usually make the argument any easier or the answer choices themselves easier. I just make their differentiation easier. It's easier to tell that this clearly doesn't matter. This one clearly does. The way I start to make things hard is I sneak a wrong answer up here. And I make it look really, really tempting. And so I make the kind of argument for my students that if my understanding around why something is right or wrong is squishy, like I don't have a clear picture of the argument, I don't really understand what they're asking me to do, then I'm getting things right a lot by accident. I'm like, I vaguely understand why the right answer is right, or I vaguely understand why the wrong answers are wrong. And if the kind of squishy edges get fat enough, they start to compete with one another. And so this wrong answer maybe actually starts to seem more right than the right one. Or I can't differentiate them at all. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get really tight margins around my understanding of the argument. Because if I have a really tight understanding about why this answer choice does support versus why this answer choice doesn't, it's much easier for me to draw the fine line between right and wrong, even when they're lying right on top of each other. And so if you can get a very clear picture of this is what the argument is testing, right? Like, then you don't end up in this place where you've got two. The wrong still just seems wrong because your understanding is way more precise. So yeah, I don't find that you get as many, like down to 2 pairs. And so negating is the option. Great question, Phanindra. Negating is the option for all assumption, strengthen, and weaken questions where the answer choices use the language not. I use negation to determine if the answer choice matters, because sometimes the way it's written with that negative language, it makes it hard to understand. So if you take the not out, you can identify, does this matter? Does this have an impact? And then you can assess, okay, it has an impact. The not, the negated version has a positive impact. So the original must have had a negative. And you can use that for strengthen, weaken, and assumption. And so great question, Mark, about this like answering. The thing is if you can recognize the argument structure, you can map it more quickly. You can filter out the extraneous information more quickly. You can get to the parts of the argument that you need more quickly, right? What you're looking for when you find these archetypes is you're looking for the skeleton under the skin. You're like, oh, I see. They're trying to blame something. Okay, so what do we see? We see this piece. All right, what are we blaming? We blame this piece. We begin to deconstruct the argument to our lattice, right? We deconstruct it on to a structure as opposed to just like reading sentence by sentence trying to figure out how it all fits, right? It's like seeing the cover of the puzzle box, and that's easier to put the puzzle together than if I just gave you a bunch of puzzle pieces and didn't show you the big picture. So like recognizing actually does cut down time. I've watched it happen quickly. Yeah. No, you'd negate one. And I've never really seen that many that have 2 that you'd want to negate both. Right. So for generally it's like one of those. And so this question was about the right answer. So if you can highlight Vaishak's, yeah. So the right option attacked a detail in the premise. Be careful. It didn't attack a detail. Because it didn't attack a detail and say that detail was a lie. That's what we want to be really cautious of. We never want to say this fact was actually not a fact, it's false. What they did is the argument gave an entire, like a big picture of this was politically motivated, and the correct answer said, well, actually, within specific small pieces, if you look at it, it wasn't. So it gives more nuance to the fact. It doesn't call the fact out for being false. Yeah. And nice, Cody. Yeah, I get stuck between two choices a lot too, but the more precise. What I find is if I'm down to two, it means that I don't have a clear or precise understanding of the argument or the answer choices. In the middle of the exam, I'm going to flip a coin and pick my favorite letter. Right, but on tests, but in practice, I'm going to look back and go, what elements of the argument was I missing? All right, I know we are over, so I'm going to turn things back over to Harsh. Thank you all so much. Please reach out if you have more questions or you want more help. You can also reach me at wit at engageprep.com. Feel free to send your questions my way as well, or you can reach out through the contact form, email me there, or set up a one-on-one with any of us. So it's been amazing. Thank y'all so much. I can't wait to see y'all around the water cooler. Bye, y'all.
Yep. Thanks, Whitney. That was really insightful, really incredible for such challenging questions. I think super helpful. And thanks everyone all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in more such sessions in the upcoming weeks. Cool. See you.